Have you ever found yourself lying awake at night thinking about a story that seems almost too incredible to be true? A story that blurs the lines between courage, mystery, and the unknown. That's exactly where I found myself a few nights ago, scrolling through old records, letters, and accounts from a time long before I was born. And then I came across her name, Amelia Earhart. Now I know what you're thinking. Amelia Earhart, the famous pilot we all learned about in school. The woman who broke records, defied expectations, and disappeared without a trace. But here's the thing. Her story is far more complex, far more human, and far more haunting than what any textbook could ever capture. Tonight I want to take you with me on a journey through the skies and the shadows, through the triumphs and the mysteries as we retrace Amelia's footsteps. This isn't just about her flights. It's about the courage it took to take off the fear of the unknown she faced, and the unanswered questions that have echoed for nearly a century. So if you're ready, let's dive into the life, the legend, and the mystery of Amelia Earhart, the woman who dared to fly higher than anyone before her, and who vanished into history, leaving behind more questions than answers. Chapter 1. The Woman Who Dared the Skies. You know, sometimes I find myself lying awake at night thinking about stories that feel like they stretch beyond the limits of what we think is possible. And a few nights ago, I stumbled across one that really caught me off guard. It wasn't a story I had fully appreciated as a kid, and yet the more I read about it, the more I realized how extraordinary it was. I'm talking about Amelia Earhart. At first, I think I knew the story in the simplest terms. She was a famous pilot, she broke records, and then somehow she disappeared. That's the version most of us get in school or in passing mentions, like a footnote in history. But the truth is, her life and her disappearance are far more layered, far more human, and far more haunting than the short version you probably heard. I've spent hours poring over articles, biographies, and historical records trying to understand not just what she did, but who she was, and why her story still grips us so powerfully, almost a century later. What fascinates me is that Amelia wasn't just chasing fame or records. She was chasing a vision of freedom of possibility. She was pursuing something that most people at the time, most people really would have told her was impossible. And that's what makes her story so compelling. Born in 1897 in Atchison, Kansas, Amelia grew up in a world that didn't exactly encourage girls to aim for the sky, literally or metaphorically. Her childhood wasn't particularly remarkable on the surface. She had a close family, moved around a bit, but there was always something in her, a restless curiosity. As a girl, she was stubborn, independent, and unafraid to challenge expectations. She loved adventure, and even as a young woman, she showed a fascination with things most girls weren't supposed to care about: cars, travel, and most importantly, flying. I think what hits me the most when I read about her early years is how small decisions can define a life. In 1920, she attended a flying exhibition with a friend, and just like that, she found the thing that would shape her entire future. She described the moment she first went up in a plane as feeling like the earth fell away beneath me and I was free. That word freedom keeps coming back in her story. It's not just about the thrill of flying, it's about breaking free from constraints, from the limits society placed on her, and from the limits she might have placed on herself if she hadn't dared to dream bigger. And yet, even as she fell in love with flying, the world wasn't exactly ready to take her seriously. She had to fight to find instructors to earn the money for lessons, and to convince others that a woman could not only fly, but could fly with skill, courage, and determination. I can't help but reflect on that, how much harder it must have been for her to prove herself, simply because of who she was. In many ways, I feel like that struggle, that constant challenge, is what shaped her. It gave her a toughness, a clarity of purpose, and a fearless approach to risk that would define the rest of her life. Her first solo flight in 1921 wasn't just a personal milestone, it was a declaration of independence. She wasn't just flying a plane, she was showing the world, and maybe more importantly herself, that she could step into spaces where women hadn't been welcomed before. That sense of defiance, combined with her calm under pressure, made her a natural pioneer. And it's no surprise that by the mid-1920s, she was breaking records and gaining public attention. But even as her fame grew, she remained grounded in her principles. Amelia wasn't chasing celebrity. She was chasing achievement, discovery, and the pure exhilaration of mastering something that most people would never dare to try. That duality ambition tempered by integrity is what makes her story feel so real, so human. She was ambitious, but not reckless, brave, but not careless. And that careful balance, I think, is why we're still drawn to her story today. What strikes me now, looking back at the early years of her career, is how those experiences set the stage for everything that came after. Every flight, every record, every public appearance wasn't just a step toward fame, it was a step into uncharted territory, both literally and figuratively. And it's that sense of venturing into the unknown, of daring to push boundaries, even when the outcome is uncertain, that makes Amelia Earhart more than just a historical figure. She becomes a mirror for anyone who's ever wanted to break free, to rise above, and to chase something bigger than themselves. I can't help but feel a kind of intimacy with her story at this point, like I'm peering into her life and seeing both her triumphs and her vulnerabilities. Because despite her confidence and her accomplishments, she was human. She had doubts, fears, and moments of uncertainty. But she kept going anyway. And that's the part of her story that resonates most with me, and I think with all of us who are drawn to true stories of courage and ambition. By the end of this chapter, I want you to understand that Amelia Earhart wasn't just a pilot who vanished. She was a woman who challenged the expectations of her time, who faced danger with grace, and who continues to inspire people almost a century later. And that, in a way, is the most remarkable part of all, the fact that even though she disappeared, her story, her spirit, and her legacy are very much alive today, echoing through every new generation that dares to look up at the sky and imagine the impossible. Chapter 2: Rising Above the Horizon. I think what really fascinates me about Amelia isn't just that she was a pilot or that she broke records that no one thought a woman could break in the 1920s and 30s. It's the way she seemed to carry an entire world of expectations and then almost effortlessly step over it. She didn't just fly planes. She flew over the limitations that society tried to impose on her. And honestly, that's something I've always struggled to understand in my own life, how someone can be so unapologetically themselves in a world that is constantly telling them not to be. Growing up, Amelia was never content with the ordinary. She was a curious child, fascinated by adventure, by machines, by motion and speed. She once described her first glimpse of an airplane as a moment that made her stomach flip and her heart leap. I can't help but imagine her wide-eyed staring at that first flying machine and feeling this impossible pull toward something bigger than herself. Most of us have glimpses of that kind of calling, but few act on it with the intensity she did. Her path wasn't easy. Her family struggled financially at times, and the world she grew up in wasn't exactly designed to nurture a girl who wanted to defy gravity. And yet Amelia found ways. She saved money from odd jobs, she learned mechanics, she studied every detail about the planes she could get near. She wasn't just dreaming, she was preparing. She knew that ambition alone wasn't enough. She had to understand the world she wanted to conquer. And somehow, even as a teenager, she carried this sense of quiet determination that I find almost impossible to imagine today. By the time she reached her early 20s, Amelia was already making waves in the aviation world. She participated in her first public flight, and soon after earned her pilot's license, the 16th woman in the world to do so. 16th. I want you to stop for a second and think about that. 16th. That number alone speaks volumes about the barriers she had to push through just to be allowed to exist in the space she loved. There were gatekeepers everywhere, societal expectations, male-dominated institutions, financial limitations. But she didn't just navigate those barriers, she shattered them. I find myself particularly drawn to the way she approached risk. Not recklessly, but deliberately. There was a certain elegance in her ambition. She studied her planes meticulously, understood every instrument, every mechanism, every quirk of flight. And yet, even with all that preparation, there was always the element of danger. The sky was unpredictable, navigation was primitive, and technology was limited. And she still went out there, time and again, facing the unknown with what feels like a mix of bravery and stubbornness. One of the most remarkable things about Amelia was how she made her ambition contagious. She wasn't secretive about her goals. She shared them, inspired others, and opened doors for women in aviation and in public life. She wasn't just living for herself, she was living as a demonstration, a proof that daring to do what others considered impossible could change the world. She understood the power of her own story before anyone else did, and she wielded it with a kind of quiet confidence that makes me think about how few of us really embrace the influence our lives can have on others. I think what also fascinates me is her relationship with fame. Amelia didn't crave it for vanity's sake. She understood that attention could be used as a tool, a way to challenge norms and amplify her message. And she did. Interviews, public appearances, lectures, she used all of it to inspire and to educate. She became a symbol of possibility, not just for women, but for anyone who felt constrained by their circumstances. And yet, she remained fiercely private about her personal life, keeping parts of herself shielded, which adds a layer of mystery and humanity to someone who otherwise seems larger than life. Even in her personal relationships, there's this remarkable balance of determination and intimacy. Her marriage to George Putnam, her sponsor and manager, was unconventional. They supported each other's ambitions, rather than confining each other to traditional roles. I think that speaks volumes about the kind of person Amelia was, not just fearless in the skies, but fearless in her choices on the ground as well. When I reflect on her early years and the way she rose above every obstacle, I realize that Amelia Earhart wasn't just chasing flights or records. She was chasing freedom, freedom of movement, freedom of thought, freedom from expectations. And in doing so, she laid the groundwork for every woman who dared to follow in her footsteps, for every person who looked up at the sky and dared to think, I could do that too. And yet, for all her preparation, her skill, her determination, there was always the unknown waiting just beyond the horizon. That unknown is what makes her story so compelling, so haunting, because even someone as extraordinary as Amelia couldn't control everything, and in that tension between human ambition and the unpredictable nature of life, her story finds its enduring power. I can't help but feel a mix of admiration and melancholy when I think about these early years, the triumphs, the relentless drive, the unshakable confidence. It makes me wonder how it feels to be so alive, so purposeful, yet constantly standing on the edge of uncertainty. And I think that's what makes Amelia Earhart not just a historical figure, but a story that continues to speak to us, that continues to challenge us, that continues to inspire, even nearly a century later. Chapter 3, Into the Unknown. I still remember the first time I really tried to imagine what it must have been like for Amelia on that final flight. I mean, think about it. You're a pilot with decades of experience, someone who's faced storms, mechanical failures, long hours of isolation in the sky, and yet every flight carries this element of uncertainty. The sky is beautiful, yes, but it's also vast and unforgiving. And Amelia, she didn't just confront it, she embraced it. I often wonder what was going through her mind on that morning in 1937 when she and Fred Noonan set off from Papua New Guinea bound for Howland Island. It wasn't a casual flight. This was the pinnacle of her career, a journey that would make history, or as we now know, a journey that would make her legend shrouded in mystery. She must have felt a mix of excitement and dread. I can almost picture her checking the instruments meticulously, going over the navigation plans, looking at Fred, and knowing that the success of this flight depended not just on skill, but on endurance, precision, and perhaps a little bit of luck. I've read every report I can find, and the more I try to reconstruct that day, the more I realize how fragile human plans are when confronted with the sheer scale of the natural world. Howland Island. Their intended destination is tiny, just a speck in the middle of thousands of miles of open ocean. The calculations had to be exact, the fuel had to be perfect. And yet we know now that something went wrong. The messages they sent back and forth over radio signals hinted at confusion, frustration, and the slow dawning horror that they were off course. It's easy to get lost in the facts, the reports, the dates. But when I try to put myself in Amelia's shoes, I feel the tension, the quiet terror that comes from knowing that the safety net is gone. Out there, you're entirely dependent on your own skills, your own judgment, and the mercy of circumstances beyond your control. And Amelia. She faced it head on. There's something incredibly human in that something I think we all resonate with the courage to step into the unknown, even when you know how easily it could go wrong. Reading about that flight, I also find myself thinking about her relationship with Fred Noonan. These two were more than pilot and navigator. They were partners in a venture that demanded absolute trust. I can't imagine the conversations they must have had in the cockpit, the jokes, the reassurances, the silent acknowledgments that each understood the stakes. Fred was experienced, confident, and meticulous, but even he couldn't control everything. And Amelia. She was as determined as ever. I think that's part of what makes this story so compelling. You have these two highly skilled, incredibly driven individuals, yet they are still vulnerable to forces far larger than themselves. And then there's the public dimension. Amelia Earhart was a global icon by this point. Every flight she took was watched, documented, and celebrated. She carried not just her own ambitions, but the hopes of a generation that was starting to believe women could do more, be more, achieve more. I can't help but feel the weight of that pressure. It wasn't just about reaching Howland Island, it was about living up to the expectations of a world that was fascinated by her, that had made her a symbol of courage, daring, and independence. But despite the fame, the scrutiny, the pressure, Amelia seemed to rise above it. There's a line I keep thinking about: courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. And that day, facing the endless expanse of the Pacific, the uncertainty of the radio signals, and the knowledge that one wrong calculation could end everything, she exemplified that kind of courage in its purest form. I've spent hours imagining the last moments of that flight. The horizon stretches endlessly, the sun rising or setting, painting the sky in colors too vast to name. Below the ocean is an immense mirror, reflecting nothing but the sky above. And somewhere out there, two people are navigating with skill, determination, and hope, while the world watches and waits. It's tragic, yes, but there's something almost poetic about it too, this confrontation between human will and the boundless unknown. And as I reflect on it, I can't help but feel that this is where Amelia Earhart's story begins to transcend mere biography or historical record. It's about the essence of human ambition, the drive to push past limits, the desire to explore, to test boundaries, to confront uncertainty with a mixture of skill, courage, and stubborn hope. And in that sense, her disappearance isn't just a mystery to be solved. It's a testament to the human spirit, to the way we all reach for the horizon, even knowing it might be out of reach. Thinking about her now, I realize that Amelia Earhart's final flight is more than just a historical event. It's a lens through which we can understand bravery, ambition, and the fragility of life. And even though we may never know exactly what happened, we are left with the echo of her courage, a reminder that some of the greatest stories are the ones that leave us with more questions than answers, the ones that continue to haunt us, inspire us, and remind us of the vast, unpredictable beauty of the world. Chapter 4. The Day the Sky Went Silent. I can't help but feel a strange kind of tension whenever I think about the day Amelia Earhart disappeared. It's not just about the mechanics of the flight or the logistics or even the theories that followed, though. Those are endlessly fascinating. It's about the human element. The way we invest so much trust, hope, and admiration in someone who is out there, literally and figuratively, on the edge of the unknown. She had been planning that flight around the world for months, maybe years, obsessively preparing for every conceivable challenge. And yet there was this ever-present fact that the sky could be merciless. She and her navigator, Fred Noonan, set off over the vast expanse of the Pacific, a route so remote and unforgiving that even the most seasoned pilots would admit it carried risks that were almost unimaginable. And still Amelia was determined, as if she felt that fear was a companion she could accept but never let control her. When I try to picture those hours of flight, I imagine Amelia in the cockpit alone, with her thoughts surrounded by nothing but clouds and endless water below. There's a sense of isolation that I think is impossible to truly grasp unless you've experienced it yourself. And yet there's also a sense of freedom, a kind of sublime clarity that comes with knowing you are entirely responsible for your own destiny in that moment. But then reality creeps back in. Even the most meticulous planning can't account for mechanical failure, shifting weather, or the unpredictable currents of the ocean. When Amelia and Fred last communicated with ground control, everything seemed normal. They were confident, precise, and professional, but behind that confidence there was an undercurrent of tension that only someone who has faced the dangers of the open sky can understand. And then silence. That's the part that gets me the most, the silence that followed. It wasn't just the absence of radio contact. It was the absence of closure. For a woman who had conquered so many milestones, whose life had been defined by pushing limits, the world suddenly had no answers. And we, the witnesses of her story through time, are left in that same suspended state. What haunts me personally is imagining the final moments of that flight. Were they calm, methodical, trying to navigate against impossible odds? Were they frantic, desperate to stay on course as fuel ran low and hope dimmed? We may never know. And yet in that ambiguity, Amelia's courage shines even brighter. It wasn't just the courage of the flights she completed, but the courage of embracing uncertainty, of stepping into the unknown when the consequences could be fatal. It's strange the way history preserves her disappearance. We have logs, reports, sightings, and theories, but at the core, what remains is human courage. The image of Amelia Earhart standing in the cockpit, eyes forward, ready to face whatever the sky would throw at her, is powerful precisely because it embodies both mastery and vulnerability. She mastered the mechanics of flying, but she never controlled the unpredictability of the world around her. And perhaps that's the lesson I keep coming back to. True bravery is not about conquering the world, it's about showing up in the face of uncertainty with resolve and grace. And so when I think of that day, the day the sky went silent, it's less about the tragedy and more about what it tells us about the spirit of a person who refused to be bound by fear, expectation, or convention. That to me is the part of Amelia's story that stays with you long after the headlines fade, the image of someone who dared, someone who risked everything to see what lay beyond the horizon, and in doing so changed the way the world thought about what a person could achieve. Chapter 5. Searching the Horizon. Even now, decades later, I can still picture the frantic searches that followed Amelia's disappearance. I can imagine the tension in the faces of the men and women who combed the Pacific Ocean for any trace of her. The planes scanning endless waves, the ships slicing through the vast expanse, hoping, praying that a miracle might appear. And yet, despite all the effort, despite all the technology of the time, nothing was found. It's strange, isn't it? How someone so meticulously prepared, someone so daring and confident could just vanish. I've spent countless nights reading through reports, letters, newspaper articles, and personal accounts of that time. And every time I find myself pulled in two directions at once. On one hand, there's this deep admiration for Amelia's courage, for her willingness to take on something so immense and so uncertain. On the other hand, there's this gnawing, unshakable feeling of tragedy, of what-ifs that can never be answered. I try to put myself in her shoes. I try to imagine the hours leading up to that flight. Did she feel a hint of unease, or was she fully consumed by the excitement of the challenge? Was she looking at the horizon, feeling the wind against her face, thinking about the sheer thrill of pushing the boundaries of human capability? Or was there a quiet moment, a fleeting thought of mortality that passed like a whisper she didn't acknowledge? And then there's the world watching. I think about the public at that time, the headlines that would have screamed her name, the people following every detail of her career with bated breath. Amelia Earhart wasn't just a pilot. She was a symbol. She was the embodiment of possibility, of breaking free from limitations that had been imposed on women, on explorers, on dreamers. When she disappeared, it wasn't just her plane that vanished. It was a piece of collective hope, a reminder of what it feels like to chase something beyond the ordinary. I've read accounts from the crew members, from the officials coordinating the search, from journalists who covered her flights. And what strikes me most is the humanity in all of them, the desperation, the exhaustion, the determination that even in the face of hopelessness, people refuse to give up. And that in itself tells a story about her impact. Even when she was gone, she inspired action, dedication, and a relentless pursuit of answers. What really fascinates me, though, are the theories. Everyone has one. Some say she ran out of fuel and crashed into the ocean. Others think she may have landed on a remote island, surviving for a time before succumbing to the elements. Then there are the more far-fetched ideas: espionage, secret missions, even abduction. And the more I read, the more I realized that these theories are less about proving a fact and more about our need to make sense of something that defies understanding. We can't accept that someone so alive, so bold, could simply disappear. We need a story, a narrative that fills the void. It makes me think about fear and risk and courage in ways I never expected. Amelia embraced the unknown not just with skill, but with a kind of audacity that borders on the incomprehensible. She faced the kind of uncertainty most of us can barely imagine, and yet she did it with purpose. That's what makes her disappearance so haunting. It's not just the mystery, it's the reminder of the fragility of life, even for the seemingly invincible. I often wonder if she had survived, what would she have done next? Would she have continued flying, breaking records, challenging conventions, or would she have chosen a quieter life, having stared so directly into the edge of possibility? That's a question we'll never have answered. But in a way, that's part of what keeps her story alive. It's unfinished, it's open-ended, and it invites us to reflect not only on her life, but on our own limits, our own ambitions, and the risks we're willing or unwilling to take. Even as I sit here thinking about her, I can feel that mix of awe and sorrow, admiration and melancholy. Amelia Earhart was a woman who reached for the skies, and in doing so, she reminded all of us that life is about pushing beyond what's expected, about daring to explore the unknown, even when the cost is uncertain. Her disappearance may remain a mystery, but her courage, her vision, and her legacy are profoundly tangible. They live on in every dreamer who looks at the horizon and dares to imagine what's possible. And maybe that's the lesson here, that sometimes the stories that grip us the most aren't the ones with neat endings or clear answers. They're the ones that leave us with questions, that challenge us to think deeper, that invite us to feel more. Amelia's story isn't just about a flight that ended in the unknown. It's about the way one person's audacity can echo through time, inspiring courage, curiosity, and wonder in all of us. Chapter 6: Theories and Shadows. Even after all these years, Amelia's disappearance continues to spark debates, theories and speculation that can take you down rabbit holes you never expected to find yourself in. I've spent countless nights reading through old newspaper clippings, pilot logs, and letters from the era, trying to piece together fragments of her final flight. And the more I read, the more I realized that the mystery isn't just about her fate, it's about how we as humans confront the unknown. Some people believe she ran out of fuel and crashed into the Pacific, a tragic but simple ending for a life full of daring. Others suggest she may have landed on a remote island, perhaps hoping to survive only to disappear in isolation. There are even theories involving espionage conspiracies or secret missions, the kind of ideas that make your imagination race and yet leave you wondering how far you're willing to stretch the facts before they become fiction. What strikes me most is how much of Amelia's life feels like a metaphor for exploration itself. Every theory about her disappearance says less about the ocean or the islands or the plains, and more about our need to understand, to control, and to make sense of uncertainty. We cling to ideas because the thought of someone so bold simply vanishing without explanation is almost unbearable. I've talked to historians, read countless memoirs, and even watched documentaries that try to make sense of the fragments left behind. And every time I do, I realize that Amelia's story challenges more than just the limits of aviation. It challenges our assumptions about courage, about risk, and about what it means to live a life unafraid of the unknown. There's also something profoundly human about the way the world reacted when she disappeared. People felt it as a collective loss, not just because she was famous, but because she represented possibility itself. In a time when women were often confined to very specific roles, Amelia showed that daring to dream bigger could actually change the world's perception of what was possible. And maybe that's why, for all the unanswered questions, her legacy doesn't feel incomplete. The mystery, as haunting as it is, keeps her alive in a way that no record award or headline ever could. She exists in the stories we tell, in the flights we imagine, in the courage we summon to face the unknown ourselves. So even if we'll never know exactly what happened that day over the Pacific, I find a strange comfort in the uncertainty. It's a reminder that life isn't meant to be fully predictable, that greatness doesn't always come with closure, and that sometimes the most profound impact a person can have is not in the answers they leave behind, but in the questions they inspire. And for me, thinking about Amelia in this way, I realize that the mystery of her disappearance doesn't diminish her, it elevates her. It reminds me that real courage is messy, uncertain, and sometimes unresolvable, but it's always worth pursuing anyway. Chapter 7. Reflections on Courage. Thinking about Amelia, now I can't help but reflect on what courage really means. It's not just about facing danger or breaking records. It's about daring to step into the unknown, to pursue something that feels impossible, and to keep going even when the world doubts you. Amelia did that every single day of her life, and in doing so, she left a mark that goes far beyond her flights or her fame. I often wonder what it would feel like to live with that kind of fearlessness. To rise each day knowing that the world might not understand your choices, that people might criticize or dismiss your ambitions, and yet still choose to keep moving forward. That's the kind of courage Amelia embodied. It's raw. It's real. And it's not the kind of courage you see in movies, it's the kind you live quietly in every decision you make. Her story reminds me that courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's silent. Sometimes it's just showing up again and again, even when the odds are stacked against you. And maybe that's why her disappearance haunts us as much as her life. Because it's a stark reminder of the fragility of life, and yet paradoxically, the immortality of spirit. When I read about her final flight, I can't help but feel a sense of intimacy with her journey. I imagine the weight of the cockpit, the hum of the engines, the endless horizon stretching before her. There's a vulnerability in that image, a reminder that bravery isn't the absence of fear, it's the choice to confront it. Amelia chose that path. Every mile she flew was a testament to her resolve. And then there's the legacy. How does someone vanish and yet remain so present in our cultural imagination? For me, it's because Amelia represented a possibility. The possibility that we could break the barriers around us, that we could chase the sky, literally and figuratively. She showed that ambition, when paired with skill and courage, could propel you into uncharted territory, even if the destination remains unknown. I think that's what draws me and so many others back to her story again and again. It's a meditation on risk and reward, on ambition and limitation, and on what it means to truly live. It's a story that forces you to ask yourself, what boundaries am I willing to challenge? What fears am I willing to confront? What heights might I reach if I dared, like Amelia, to take flight? So even as the details of her disappearance remain a mystery, the essence of her courage is unmistakable. And in that there's something profoundly inspiring. Amelia Earhart isn't just a figure in history books, she's a mirror reflecting the potential within all of us to face the unknown with determination, with grace, and above all, with courage. Chapter 8. Living in the Echo of Mystery. Even now, when I think about Amelia Earhart, there's this strange tension between inspiration and loss that I can't shake. She became more than a person. She became a symbol of daring, of courage, of the human desire to push beyond boundaries. But she also became a reminder of how fragile life is, and how the unknown can linger in ways that leave permanent shadows on those left behind. It's fascinating to me how the story of someone who disappeared nearly a century ago can still affect us today. I often catch myself imagining the conversations she might have had, the thoughts racing through her mind as she navigated the vast, empty stretches of the Pacific. What was she feeling? Excitement, fear, determination, or maybe a combination of all three swirling together in that unique way that only someone like Amelia could experience. And yet the mystery of her disappearance is what makes her story so enduring. There are theories, yes, so many theories, but none of them fully capture what it must have been like to live in her shoes, to face the sky with nothing but skill, instinct, and sheer will to guide you. That uncertainty, that tension between what we know and what we can only imagine, is what keeps her memory alive. I think about the people who searched for her tirelessly, combing the ocean for a glimpse, a sign, any evidence that she might still be out there. They were driven by hope, but also by a deep respect for a woman who had become larger than life. And in a way, their efforts became part of the story too, the human desire to find answers, to reconcile the unknown, to make sense of what can't be controlled. It makes me reflect on our own lives in a strange way. We all face uncertainties, choices that stretch us beyond our comfort zones, moments when we stand on the edge of what's familiar and peer into the unknown. Amelia's story reminds me that courage isn't about having all the answers. It's about stepping forward anyway, even when the horizon ahead is unclear, and trusting that our choices, our actions matter in ways we can't always measure. And maybe that's the lesson here, that living with mystery, with unanswered questions, doesn't diminish the value of our experiences. Amelia didn't need to be found to matter. Her life, her daring, her relentless pursuit of the skies, that's what continues to echo through time. Even today, when I think about her flights, her records, her courage, and her disappearance, I feel a mix of awe and melancholy. It's a reminder that some stories don't end neatly, that some mysteries remain deliberately unresolved, and that the impact of a life lived boldly can resonate long after the person is gone. So as I sit here reflecting, I realize that perhaps that's why her story sticks with us. Because it's not just a story of a vanished pilot, it's a story of humanity's restless spirit, of the pull toward the unknown, and of the courage it takes to follow your dreams, no matter how impossible they may seem. And in that sense, Amelia Earhart isn't really gone at all. She's still out there, soaring above the horizon in every act of bravery, every step into the unknown, every person daring to chase something bigger than themselves. And that, I think, is the true legacy of her life, a reminder that courage and curiosity are timeless, and that the echoes of her story will continue to inspire for generations to come. Chapter 9: The Legacy Beyond the Horizon. As I sit here thinking about Amelia Earhart, I realize that her story isn't just about one person, one flight, or one disappearance. It's about the human desire to explore, to challenge the impossible, and to leave a mark on the world. Even though she vanished into the unknown, her legacy has never faded. It's carried in the stories we tell, in the records she broke, in the way she inspired generations of women to chase their dreams, and in the countless pilots who followed in her footsteps, daring to soar higher because she had done it first. There's a haunting beauty in the mystery of her disappearance. It forces us to confront something deeply human, the realization that no matter how much we prepare, how skilled we are, or how brave we feel, there are forces beyond our control. But maybe that's exactly what makes Amelia's story so powerful. It reminds us that courage isn't about guarantees. It's about choosing to face the unknown anyway, to pursue what you believe in, and to risk everything in the name of that pursuit. I often think about the people who searched for her, the crew of ships and planes, the radio operators, the families, the friends. Imagine dedicating days, weeks, months, and sometimes years to the hope of finding someone who might already be gone. That's an act of courage in itself. And the fact that Amelia's story continues to captivate the world almost a century later speaks to the universal longing we have to understand, to connect and to honor those who dared to dream bigger than the world thought possible. What fascinates me the most, though, is not just her courage in the sky, but her resilience on the ground. The way she handled fame, criticism, and societal expectations, it was a constant balancing act. She knew that breaking records wasn't enough. She had to be a role model, a spokesperson, and an example for future generations. And she did all of that while remaining true to her own vision, her own desires, her own unshakable belief that the horizon was never too far and the sky never too vast to conquer. Even today, I can't read about Amelia without feeling a mix of awe and melancholy. There's inspiration in her ambition, in her fearlessness, in her relentless drive. But there's also a quiet sorrow in the unanswered questions, the what-ifs, and the void left behind by a life that disappeared too soon. And yet maybe that's the point. Maybe the absence, the mystery, is part of what allows her story to live on so vividly. It reminds us that the human spirit is capable of extraordinary things, and that even in loss we find stories that shape us, challenge us, and push us to dream beyond our limits. I think that's why I keep coming back to her story. Not just to solve the mystery, not just to speculate about what happened in the vast Pacific, but to sit with the life she lived, to reflect on the courage she embodied, and to remind myself that life isn't about avoiding the unknown. It's about facing it head on, with daring, with hope, and with the understanding that even if we disappear from sight, the echoes of what we do can resonate forever. Amelia Earhart's story is more than history. It's a mirror that challenges us to ask ourselves, what are we willing to risk for our dreams? How far are we willing to go into the unknown? And when the world doubts us, will we still take flight? Her disappearance doesn't diminish her, it magnifies her. It's a testament to the idea that greatness isn't measured solely by outcomes, but by courage, vision, and the willingness to chase the horizon even when we know the sky might never let us return. And as I reflect on all of this, I feel a strange comfort. The mystery, the uncertainty, the unanswered questions, they're not failings. They're part of the story. They are the reason Amelia Earhart continues to inspire, continues to challenge, and continues to live on in our imagination. Her story is not confined to the past. It's alive in every act of courage, in every dream pursued, in every person who dares to step into the unknown and say, I will fly. In the end, that's the real legacy she left us, the courage to take flight, even when the horizon is uncertain, and the reminder that sometimes the greatest adventures aren't the ones that end with a landing, but the ones that echo forever in the hearts of those who remember. As we come to the end of this journey, I find myself reflecting on what Amelia Earhart really represents. She was more than a pilot. She was a pioneer, a risk-taker, and a reminder that the boundaries of possibility are often the ones we set for ourselves. Her disappearance may never be fully explained, but maybe that's part of what keeps her story alive. The mystery, the unanswered questions, and the inspiration to keep looking, keep wondering, and keep daring. Her life reminds us that courage isn't about knowing the outcome. It's about moving forward anyway. It's about embracing uncertainty with determination, passion, and a willingness to fly into the unknown. And in that way, Amelia Earhart's spirit isn't gone. It lives on in every story we tell, in every person who dares to dream, and in every heart that feels the pull of the sky. Thank you for joining me tonight, for stepping into this story, and for taking a moment to remember that some legends are defined not by the endings we know, but by the journeys they inspire.